Hello, and thank you for joining the Aaron Werner podcast on iCode Media. Today is a little bit different. I invited my good friend, Dr. Laurie Sorrenson, to come on. She gave the closing speech at a recent Women in Optometry Women's Leadership Conference that was held in conjunction with the American Academy of Optometry in New Orleans. Check out the YouTube version of this podcast to see the video that has her slides on it. But definitely enjoy the podcast. We had a fantastic discussion about being bold. We want to hear from you, so please join the conversation by leaving a comment, sharing with a friend, and leaving a 5-star review. Also, be sure to support those who support us. Discovering the impact of LifeMeter this year has been truly transformative for motivating my patients with macular degeneration to embrace carotenoid supplements. With this non-invasive device, we can now quantitatively show that supplements are working. LifeMeter assesses carotenoid concentration in the skin, reflecting fruit and vegetable intake, and indicating levels in other vital tissues like the retina and brain. Supported by over 30 peer-reviewed publications, LifeMeter's accuracy, consistency, and effectiveness have been validated in 2,000 subjects of varying background. What's more, it offers the flexibility to prescribe the best-suited products for each patient. My patients love knowing their numbers and witnessing improvements in as little as a month. Better yet, compliance with carotenoid supplements has surged, doubling our sales of MacuHealth since the LifeMeter's implementation.
So this thing, that I did, it was basically a speech, right?
Right.
So when they said do a podcast, I was like, how's that? Because I've done podcasts and they ask me a question and I answer it.
Right.
And then we have a conversation. And so how do you see this playing out?
I don't know. So I think we'll start. I was bummed because I didn't get there in time and I wanted to hear the speech. You had emailed me ahead of time, and so the topic was awesome and perfect for you. And so then I saw the list of comments on Facebook with people saying they wanted to hear it. I said, well, let's give them that opportunity. So I'm going to start off by trying to be quiet and not jump in.
It's always easier when you do, but I don't know how that. I could see you and I going through these slides and us spending 3 hours on it because you and I talk about this kind of stuff. Yeah. I could see that for sure. Examples of this or that, or how that story ties into your story, or you know what I mean, or even just asking more questions about my story, because obviously you can't do that when you're doing a speech. But so one thing I did was I started off kind of emotional, which is not normally me either.
No.
Because Joel had sent me, I'm trying to find it, a text right before I started. And I debated whether to read it out loud. And I did. And now if I can find it. Oh, here it is. Okay. And so I read it and went, oh, that was a really bad idea. It wasn't really, because it kind of brought them into my world a little bit before I got started. And I kind of do that with Boo too. I tell them my embezzlement story.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's actually part of this. I talk about that that's part of because I ended up just telling my story is what I did, in way more detail than I typically tell my story. So that's 80% of the talk was that, if not more. So.
Cool.
Yeah.
Nice. So what was the text Joel sent?
If I don't talk, it's as bad as what you sent me. So somebody was saying something about you, and Eric was standing there, and he goes, "Oh yeah, he sent her the nicest thing that anybody's ever sent her in her entire life." He was there when I read it. If I don't talk to you before your speech, good luck and knock it out of the park. Can't think of anyone better suited for the being bold talk than you. Look bold up in the dictionary and there's your picture. I love you and I'm so proud of you. You're my hero. So I sent that to Eric. I told him about it. And he just wrote, ew.
Well, that gave me chills.
I know. yeah, it was, yeah. And, he normally would go, but he was back home doing all the art for all the tables and stuff for the wedding and the welcome party and all that stuff. So he worked every minute I was gone. So, I think he felt guilty not going to.
No. Well, but maybe that made it even better.
Yeah.
Right? If he
Yeah,
couldn't be there, it's
yeah.
so
Yeah.
very cool. Well, let's jump in and see if you can share your slides and talk to it, and we'll see how it goes. Actually, before we get started, and jumping into it, for those who don't know, you were speaking at the OWA event at Academy, right? And OWA stands for Optometric Women's Association, or Optical Women's Association.
I think it's just WIO, Women in Optometry.
Oh, it's a WIO.
I think it's WIO, Women in Optometry, and I think Jobson Publishing puts it on, and it was a leadership conference. It wasn't just for women. There were actually men in the audience too, but Women in Optometry put it on, and but the theme this year was Be Bold.
Cool. Right, Be Bold, and you got to be the closing speaker for it.
Correct. I was the closing speaker, and I really had a tough time. I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what I wanted to talk about. I talked to my son and my husband. I wrote you. I wrote a bunch of my friends and colleagues in optometry, and everybody just kept saying, "Tell your story." And I had done a whole bunch of slides already, and I just kept hearing over and over, "Tell your story." So, by the way, that's my baby that's on the way. We'll be here in February of Eric and Tiffany's. Eric
cool.
is my son. Yeah, son and partner now. So I asked my friends, and they said, and then one of my friends, Dr. Clark Newman, affectionately known as Sparky, called me and said, just tell him your story. Tell him how you had all these goals. You wanted to be president of State Association. You wanted to get involved legislatively. You want to teach and, end up with this big practice and multiple doctors. And I said, cool, okay, except that's not true at all. I never had a goal, any of those goals, not a single one. When I graduated from optometry school, my goal was to get a job. And if I made $70,000 a year, I just knew that, life would be good forever and I'd be perfectly fulfilled. Well, that's not what really happened. So currently now I teach at the school and I work with Vision Source on practice management stuff and in the Austin area. TOA, I'm still the TOPAC chair. I've been president. I work with a charity called Half Helen and recently became a professional editor of Review of the Optometric Business. Not one single thing on there is something I ever had a long-term goal on. It was just a matter of opportunities that came up and seeing situations and just getting motivated to do things, in the moment. But I did end up with a 9-doctor single location practice, and that's the building we built when was it? Almost 8 years ago. Yeah, 8 years ago. And wow, it seems like it was just yesterday. And so I did end up with that. Again, I never had that as a goal. These are my doctors. Somebody had a brilliant idea of having dogs in the picture. Bad idea. It's
a cute picture.
It is a cute picture. Pure and utter chaos. This is my son right there. This is my big dog. This is my little dog. These two big dogs are hers. You can tell they're completely in love with her. And this is my son's best friend, who joined our practice last year. And this is my son's dog too. So. This is the normal picture that's actually hung up in, actually we have the dog picture in the hallway at the office and we have this picture somewhere else in the office. So, and this is my crazy staff. At Christmas, we've actually added quite a few people since then. So managing all those people is a lot of fun. My son really helps a whole lot with that. So back to my story is what everybody told me to do, talk about my journey. So when I first graduated, I worked for 2 optometrists. They had an office called, several locations called the Viewpoint, Eye Associates for the doctor side, and then they did a super optical that made glasses in 2 hours next door, and it was called the Viewpoint, which I thought was a really cool name. Yeah. Went to work for them within a month or two, they ended up selling all their opticals to a company nobody heard of before called Lens Crafters. And they were given the lease to all of the doctor's side in the southern United States. And so they were managing that. Well, while I was working for them, I was a really good associate doctor. I stayed after hours, I painted walls, I ran office meetings, I was managing the staff, I was hiring, I was doing a lot of stuff like that. And I asked these two doctors, who I really like and respect a lot, for a raise for my front desk person. I even wrote a whole letter about all the things that she did, how great she was, and she was making, this was a long time ago, $5 an hour, and I asked for a 50-cent an hour increase. And they told me no. So I always say in my life, I have these, some things are just like slowly get there, and then there's other things in my life where I kind of have this weird click in my brain, and that was my click. I was like, I can't work for somebody like this, that I work this hard and they tell me no on something so simple. What I didn't know is they were having financial issues. Lens Crafters ended up kicking them out pretty quickly. I went from there into a partnership with two different optometrists. And while I was there, very shortly thereafter, Lens Crafters came back to me and asked me if I wanted to take the lease over in that space when they basically kicked out their previous two optometrists because they were not paying their rent. And I looked at the numbers. I said, oh, okay, that sounds like a good deal. I'll do that, and I'll sell this partnership to my husband at the time, who was an optometrist. And I thought it would take a year or two. I thought legal stuff, so I can prepare for this. No, about a week later, I get a phone call and said, we're locking them out today. You need to open tomorrow.
Oh.
I didn't even know what a DBA was. I had no idea how, it was a, pretty thriving practice. I didn't know how to do payroll. I didn't know how to pay taxes. I didn't know how to do anything. And I had to open the next day.
Wow.
And I did. It was crazy. But that's probably not even my most crazy moment in my journey. But I had to do that. So I got the Lens Crafters lease. During that time, I got on the TOA board and started, moving up the ladder as officer and all that stuff. And then while I was doing that, with that Lens Crafters lease, there was a couple, the Tholins, Mark and Barbara Tholin, worked for me in that lease part-time. And Mark had a private practice out in south of Austin in a small town, but he also worked for me part-time. And he just kept always encouraging me to open a private practice. But, I was kind of happy with my situation. Well, then the strip center that I was in, it's a high-end strip center that we were in, decided they wanted to put in a bookstore, and they wanted to move the Lens Crafters around the corner. Well, that took it from, first of all, the Lens Crafters, the way it was designed was done by the doctors, and it was big and it was pretty. And then they moved me around the corner into that ugly blue and khaki. I don't know if that's still how they are made now, but little bowling alley type doctor side. And we were busy. I think we were the third or fourth. I think we were the fourth busiest Lens Crafters practice in the country.
Wow.
And so trying to do that into that little, small center was a challenge. I like challenges, so I wasn't, I didn't like it. My patients didn't like it because the parking was a whole lot worse over on that side. But I was okay. But this guy kept telling me I could do private practice. Well, then I had my next click. When we moved the practice, they picked a date. I was out of town on a Sunday. So I closed the practice, and my staff moved us over into the new space while I was out of town. The regional manager went and told all the higher-ups at Lens Crafters how awful I was because I closed for a whole day to move on a day when I was out of town. And that was another one of those clicks. I was like, I did not go to school and work this hard to have some jerk talk to me that way and talk about me that way. So that's when I decided I'm going to sell the Lens Crafters and I'm going to open private practice. So that's what I did. And I ended up opening cold. So I'm going to take a minute and shift gears for a second and talk about what makes a good leader. there was this analysis that was done, and Dory Carlson's the one that turned me on to this analysis that talked about the 4 traits of successful CEOs. It was a huge analysis of 17,000 CEOs. There was tons of interviews, decades of research, and they decided that these were the 4 traits that were the most important: being decisive, reliable, they adapt boldly, and they're not scared of conflict, right? But what they found out was...
Okay. So what we're going to do? I don't know. What do you want to do? Look, Flex, first I say what we're going to do. Then you say, I don't know, what do you want to do? Then I say what we're going to do. You say what you want to do. What we're going to do, what you want. Let's do something. Okay. What do you want to do? Blimey.
By far, the most important thing was being decisive. And I think that when you're talking about being bold in an optometric practice or as an optometrist, being decisive is a huge part of that, right? Being decisive, being brave is what being bold is all about. So while I was doing research for this talk, I started, because it was at the Women in Optometry conference, right? And so I don't usually look at things like female versus male and differences and all that stuff, but I started doing that for this conference in my research. And I started thinking about all the different doctors that I mentor. And both men and women sometimes have trouble being decisive, but sometimes I think that some women have more of an issue with that. And I started looking at the research and found out that parents are 4 times more likely to tell girls and boys to be more careful. This was done in this was a study that was done in emergency rooms by pediatric psychologists. And then this other woman, Reshma Saujani, she wrote a book. She also wrote, she's the founder of Girls Who Code, trying to get women to be more in the coding world and all that. And she says we're raising our girls to be perfect, but we're raising our boys to be brave. And it made me think for a second about the way I was raised. And I honestly have no memory of my parents telling me to be careful. I know they didn't tell me to be perfect, for sure. I don't remember the words brave, but I could do anything. And I was allowed to go down to the creek with the neighborhood, boys in the neighborhood, and climbing trees and fishing for crawdads and playing football with the whole, and they didn't even know where I was, right? So I think that part of that was my upbringing a little bit. Why I don't have as much trouble with being decisive is I didn't catch that be careful stuff. I do see it with friends and family with their kids, mostly girls. But so back to my private practice journey. So I opened cold, got pregnant. So I always say, that's a terrible time to get pregnant, right after you open a practice, right? It's like, it was terrible. But when is a good time? Now?
Never.
Oh, no, I can do it really good right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that ship has sailed, right? The problem was when I got pregnant too, I had to go on maternity leave. I went into premature labor. So here I just opened the practice and I went into premature labor and I was put on bed rest. So for 11 weeks in a brand new practice, I was not in the office. I was laying in bed on my left side. And that wasn't easy. I ended up hiring, I had a bunch of friends that came in and saw some of my patients for a little while, which was really nice, but not for 11 weeks. And then I ended up hiring a doctor that she was playing softball on the local optometry team, had just come to town, had started practice down south, and they said, she's looking for some fill-in work. So I hired her to come in. I don't even remember how much it was, a couple days a week. So she did that. She ended up becoming, selling that practice, closing that practice, I guess, and coming to work for me full-time and eventually becoming my partner. So right from the beginning, I ended up having a doctor in my practice, which is kind of unusual. Most people build their practice up and get really busy, and then they hire an associate doctor. And I had one from, almost day one. During that whole beginning time, within 4 years, I was president of the Texas Optometric Association, so I was really kind of busy. I also had been picked to be the Benedict Professor of Practice Management at UHCO during that exact same time. So I had to come up with a whole day seminar on practice management, which was tough since I was scared of public speaking at the time. And so I was super, super busy. And then I found out that my partner was embezzling from me. So this whole time that I was super busy, she had ended up taking over the books and was paying her best friend had started a practice. And she, there was several times I asked her about it, and she was my partner, right? She couldn't be a partner with somebody else. Well, that obviously she was. And she was using my checkbook to pay the bills for this other practice. Amongst other things. I was paying her student loans that I didn't know anything about and some things like that. So here I was, president of TOA. Oh, I was the Benedict Professor of Practice Management. I'm supposed to be a good business person. And obviously I wasn't, because I wasn't paying attention enough to even know that I'd been embezzled from for years at that point in time. So that's when I decided I needed to become a better business person. I ended up really enjoying that part of the practice. And then I found out that I really enjoyed helping other doctors become better business owners too. And I think, one of my core values is to try to make a difference, especially for my family and for my optometry family. And so I always talk about how this was seriously one of the worst times of my entire life, was during this whole embezzlement process, when everything that was going on with my life. But it was also probably one of the very best things that ever happened to me, to get me where I am today. So, things work out for a reason, right? So, skipping 20 whole years, after opening the practice at age 56, I decided to build a building, 11,000 square foot building, 100% financed, and go into a lot of debt. I definitely had multiple people tell me that, actually a friend of mine who had already paid off his building, who's only 2 years older than me, when I told him I was doing this, he goes, "Oh man, you're too old to be doing that." Good friend of mine. Yeah. I'm sure I will never pay off the building, but it still has made a lot of sense, and I've really enjoyed it. So I opened the practice in 95, the building was in 2015, and Eric, my son, became a partner in 2021. And here's the building, beautiful building that we built in 2015. So I think the whole theme of the conference was about being bold, and I think you've got to be willing to take risk, right? That's what being bold means. And I think for me, one way that I think that I can take a risk is that if it doesn't work, I'll fix it. I'll either stop doing it or I'll change it or whatever. I kind of have this attitude. I have a history. I've been doing this a long time, and so far everything's worked out pretty darn well. Get embezzled from and still end up having a successful practice. Mm-hmm. So can I get this attitude, oh, we can do this. And I saw this from David Viscott Risking. He said, if you can't risk, you can't grow. If you can't grow, you can't become your best. If you can't be your best, you can't be happy. And if you can't be happy, what else matters? So to me, this kind of embodies how I kind of think about it. So, but being bold and being brave does not mean that you're not scared, right? Mm-hmm. I think one of the scariest things I ever did was building this building. I know that sounds weird. So when I was going through that thought process of building this building, I went into this, best case, worst case scenario, right? Best case is what everybody will tell you. Oh, it's the best decision I ever made was building a building, right? I mean, you hear that from everybody. And I was terrified because I knew my expenses were doubling overnight. And so I decided, what's the worst case scenario? This helps me a lot. I don't know that it helps everybody. If you have a lot of anxiety, maybe this wouldn't help as much. But my son told me that he's more risk averse than me. And he said thinking through this like I do really helps him with all the risks that we take in the practice. He's gotten really good at being much more of a risk taker since he started practicing here. Still struggles with it a little bit. But the building the building, what's the worst case scenario? I can't pay. Yeah, it doesn't work. I can't make the payments, right?
Yeah.
I go bankrupt. right? I have to downsize my house. I lose the building. I end up having to go get a job as an optometrist, still making more money than probably 90% of the population in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's not good, right? It's not what I want, but it's not the end of the world.
No.
So I can take that risk, and this was one of my bigger risks, I think, because I didn't have the click that made me like angry and have that motivation, right? I had a great landlord, and I had really good pricing, so I was definitely not. This was a much better idea than where I was before. So that really helped me a lot. I got in that mode, and when I can think about the worst case and go, you know what, I'll survive that. I can take all those fears and I can put them behind me the vast majority of the time and just not let that, get in the way of my decision making and moving forward. So for me, that helps a lot. Do you do that?
I do. I try to recognize the emotion and like the stomach brain and say, okay, it's, the world's going to end. Everything's going to turn out horribly. You'll be destitute. Your kids will eat top ramen forever. And then I remember that they like top ramen and cup of noodles. But then I try to go to the facts too, saying, well, what does that really mean? Okay, if I have to declare bankruptcy, that's 7 years of not being able to buy a, fancy new car, but I don't want a fancy new car anyway. And I know I can work hard enough to pull myself out of it. So I try to match the emotional what ifs with the tactical what ifs, and then realize that if that's the worst it's going to be, there are worse things.
Yeah. For me, that helped. I just need to get that out of my brain. Mm-hmm. And then I feel like I can move forward. The other thing that I do, so that's like probably more for those bigger ones, like building a building or some crazy stuff. But the other thing we do is I'm getting ready to give you a list of some stuff that we've done that might not on the surface look like it was a great idea from a business perspective. But I just did this last week with my staff. There's something that we're implementing new, and I was getting some pushback from some of the opticians. And I said, here's the deal, guys. Let me tell you the big picture, why we're doing it, which I'd already done, but I repeated it. And I said, but here's the deal. We're going to do it for 3 months. And if it doesn't work out, we'll stop. I promise. Now, sometimes it's 3 months, sometimes it's a year, because sometimes it's a project that you're doing and you paid a year ahead of time, which I'll talk about that in a second. And but 3 months is usually my go-to. It gives you time enough to fix all the little problems and see if it really will work. And I pulled the plug before 3 months when I told them 3 months before. There was something in the contact lens world I did years ago. Actually, I think believe it or not, I think it was CLX when it wasn't integrated. Mm-hmm. And I was getting so much pushback, and then when it got integrated, we went all in, and of course you use it all the time now. But the 3 months is I think it's another way where I can go, okay, we've made the decision, why we made the decision, and we're going to do it for 3 months. I'm not going to think about it anymore. All I'm going to do is try to make it work. As I always say, I'm going to whole-ass one thing, never half-ass two things. We're going to whole-ass this thing for 3 months and see if it works, right? Who was that from Parks and Rec?
Oh, it was.
Yeah.
Yep.
Can't think of his name.
Me neither.
I'm blanking. Yeah. Anyway. Yeah. Oh, I can't think of it. Okay. So let me give you a list. I went over this with my son. Some things that we've done in our practice. So this is a little bit more the practice management side. And a lot of people took pictures at the conference of my list. I did split it into 2 slides, by the way. Because of Donna Michelek. She said my slides were too wordy, which I totally agreed with her. So top 5 were, I forgot about this. Eric brought it up. I hired 3 doctors in less than 6 months. I know, right? So what happened was I had a doctor who left to go, that I hired, my first male doctor actually, and he decided he wanted to go work for University of Houston at a clinic up in Dallas area. It's kind of a charity clinic. And so I hired his friend, Dr. O'Smiley. And so she was only going to work for 6 months. And she actually thought our practice wouldn't have enough pathology to make her, I don't know.
Happy.
She was
that was her thing.
happy. Yeah, she had, she did a residency in pathology, and so she thought she wanted to be more like a hospital setting or that type of thing. And I had already decided to hire another doctor to do some neurovisual stuff in our practice. She was a previous intern of mine, so I'd already been talking to her. So I was about to add that another doctor, so one doctor. Well, my son was graduating in 6 months, and so he was going to take over from Dr. Smiley. Well, Dr. Smiley's still here. That was 4 years ago. So she never left. So I ended up keeping her on, adding my son, and taking on Dr. Catalawson full time. And she's one of our neurovisual doctors. She also does some other stuff too. But so I ended up doing all that in less than 6 months. So that might not have seemed smart, but ended up being a brilliant move. They were a little not super busy during the first 6 months to 12 months, but they still made good money, and it worked out well. So there's another one, which I know you know about this one too. I bought a $200,000 Silverstone when we already had a Monaco and a Daytona paid for. So that doesn't seem smart, right? Because I'm already making all that money off of Optos, screenings, and now I've got that had already been paid for, and so it was all profit. Now I'm going to add this debt in there, and I'm not going to make any more money. Well, I raised my fees, and I'm making more money now than I did before, which I could have raised my fees and not got the Silverstone, but I don't think I would have, right? Because it was already paid for. So it worked out really well. We're actually quite profitable with it.
Nice. Did that drive efficiencies too?
No. I wouldn't say it drove more efficiencies. I would say it's so cool. So like we had a retinal detachment last week, and we could take an OCT or the whole detachment.
That's cool.
You could see the whole sucker. Yeah, so you could tell it was a detachment, not a schisis. It was clear as a bell. It was really cool. So it does just stuff like that out in the periphery. You're like, is that this, or is it this, or is it this? And it's just fun to look at too. And it doesn't take very long to do it. So I just wanted it.
Well, there's something to be said for the joy cool factor, right?
Correct.
When I asked you that question, your face just lit up, right? So we do this to be happy. We don't do this because I don't pick up trash for, as a trash man or do other jobs that I wouldn't like to do. There's got to be a happiness factor.
And, I have I have one partner and 7 associate docs now too. And I want them to be happy here. I don't, we don't have turnover with them or anything. And, pretty much if they go anywhere else, they're not going to have as cool equipment as we have. So I would hope that would help, retain them some, I think. So, there's not very many Silverstones in the country at this point. So, and then we almost always hire inexperienced staff. I mean, you have to have a good onboarding program, which we do in business optometry that I created to help us do that. And we really kind of perfected that a lot. We just hired somebody with a little bit of experience from another Vision Source practice recently. But, we have different systems, right? Yeah. So we still used our same onboarding program, but she had some experience in that other office. But I can't remember the last time we hired somebody with experience before that. And I think it's in I'll talk about her in just a second because I'll bring her up. And we have not had patients fill out paperwork since I opened my practice in 1995.
Wow.
Which was kind of a thing back then, right?
Yep.
I didn't do it back then. I started off with an EHR in 1995. It was a DOS system. It was actually an OfficeMate DOS, which was actually very efficient, but not very versatile, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. But we've done that for a really long time. And recently we started shipping glasses directly from the lab to the patient. That's not for everybody, obviously, but it has made us significantly more efficient in giving our lab people significantly more time to do other things. It's working really well, but I know that's not for everybody. So I also have an honorable mention slide. So we paid for Treehouse Eyes, even when we already had a myopia management program in place. We were struggling getting it where I wanted it, and that has more than paid off. We've always paid extra for staff when they work on Saturdays, but I was always like $3 an hour or $20. And then I think it was right after COVID, I decided to make it real and start paying them an extra $50 for every staff person on a Saturday. if they work, I think, at least the six of the 7 hours or something like that. I don't remember what the rules are now. And we don't have any trouble staffing Saturdays anymore. Plus, it feels right, and it's still extremely our Saturdays are extremely profitable. We've never done bonus commissions. We've always paid health insurance for staff. I don't pay 100%, but I pay a lot, way over 80%. Probably closer to, it depends on which one they get. I usually try to hit one plan that we're paying significant, like 90 to 95%, so that they're not much out of pocket, but it's not the best plan, and then they can pay more to get a better plan. And then I said a minute ago about hiring both candidates. That woman I just told you about that had some experience, she kind of came in after the fact, after Eric had already started doing interviews, and he had already decided to hire 2 people. And then this woman shows up. So we hired 3. At the same time. So that's working out really well. With as many staff as we have, we know we're going to have turnover. And that's something I tell even smaller practices too. You're trying to decide between 2 people, and I know you already told me you're struggling with one of your other employees. Hire them both. If you're in growth mode, if you're struggling, cash flow's rough, and you're not in growth mode, that's a different story. But if you're in growth mode, you rarely go wrong going ahead and hiring both. But depends on.
What's your take on being lean? And I think when it comes to staff, I've got a very strong opinion on being lean with staff, but I'm curious on yours.
I try to look at where I need my staffing in 3 months. So and you can look at it, you can see the dates we hire people. It's kind of funny because they're very much clumped together. So if I know, like in July, and this isn't always true because you might have somebody, like we just had some leave on maternity leave, and we had somebody go back to school, and so then we'll hire. But if I'm thinking we need to hire in July, or we might need to hire in July, I think, okay, we're talking about October, November, 2 worst months of the year, right? We're going to be slow. We don't need to hire yet. But do I hire in October? In November? A lot. Because December and January is going to be crazy busy. So we tend to hold off when we see the 3 months from now is going to be slow for a couple of months, but then we will be a little bit more aggressive when we know in 2 to 3 months we're going to be busy.
Oh, that's interesting. I haven't looked at the where I am in 3 months. I always try to be 1 head count over where I need.
Oh, me too.
At least, and I mean, you wouldn't run a sports team and manage a sports team without a backup, and so I definitely don't want to manage an office without one. I just figure if somebody's out for whatever reason, it could be horrible, or they could have just won the Mega Millions jackpot and told me to pound sand because they're never coming back again. Either way, I'm down a head count. So if I'm out 1 person or if I'm out 2 people, can I still run?
Yeah. So think about this for a second. This is something that I've said to other people before, especially I shouldn't say that. My mentees of the newer practices. Yeah. I always think of them as my children, right? That's why I said little. But let's say that you have 10 employees. Let's say that in our practice, they get, after their first year, they get 120 hours, up to 120 hours PTO, plus we have 7 paid holidays. So that's a month.
Yeah.
So if you have 10 employees, what that means is 10 months of the year, you're short 1 person. Mm-hmm. So in my practice, we have 40-something employees. Think about that. 40 months of the year, which is more than right, we're short someone, which means we're actually short 3 to 4 people every month. Yeah. So if we're not overstaffed by 3 or 4, we're understaffed.
Yep.
Which is basically what you just said, but it's like the thought process of your PTO. And that's a planned time off, much less emergencies or anything weird going on. So I think if there's one thing that I push my mentees, all the different doctors that I help when they first start their practices to do, it's hire more people.
Yeah, for sure.
They'll tell me their numbers. I go, girl, you need 2 more people. Like, you need to hire somebody. I probably say that more than I do anything else. And probably second would be, yeah, you need to fire that one. That's the second thing I probably said more than anything. I said it this morning, as a matter of fact, to one of them. And then this paying for ASL and Spanish classes and CPR classes, that came from one of my employees when I asked what should I talk about that, you think is different, that might not have looked like a smart thing to do at the beginning. I think this just shows them that we care about their growth. We do see a lot of deaf people, but to get good enough to talk to a deaf person ASL will take a long time. So will Spanish, but it's just helping them with their growth. We started closing in the middle of the day for lunch. We do learning, we do fun stuff, and pay them for lunch and pay them during that time. We've been doing that for a long time. We do Thursday happy hours at the office quarterly. And we close down a little bit early, and we will do, we provide drinks and food and sometimes a taco truck, and sometimes do karaoke, play Jenga, cornhole, all that kind of stuff. So we do that just for fun. We just do it at the end of the day. And then probably one of the bigger things is letting my son take over all the hiring. Actually, that's not even true. I didn't let him take over all the hiring. He just did it.
He just took it.
He just took it. And I asked him the other day, I said, what we were doing, I don't know what we were doing. What's your favorite thing to do in the office? And he said, hiring. Like, what's wrong with him? Who likes to hire? I didn't hate it, but to like it, he's just so good at it. He's got it all figured out. And we have that video on Insight in Business Optometry, I believe, right? In the resources.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. A lot of people have watched it, and they just step by step do exactly what he said, and it's really helped them a lot. So he's gotten really good at it.
That's
so
cool. Can I share something on that? Because I like Eric, I'm a multi-generation, and when I joined the practice, Dad let me start taking over lots of things, and it was really cool to assume that responsibility, kind of knowing there was a safety net. In my case, my dad, in Eric's case, you, but really owning that responsibility out of the gate and having the training wheels off. And I think that helped me grow much more quickly because I had to assume that risk. I had to assume that responsibility, whether I had a good hire or bad hire, or made a good decision, bad decision. And in watching Eric's growth, I think a lot of that is kudos to you by saying, yeah, I've got this giant 9-doctor practice. It's a lot of responsibility if you hire the wrong person or if you make the wrong decision. Mm-hmm. But doing it helps them grow that much better. And I think it made our practice grow even more because I was able to, I don't want to say get up to speed, but comfortable with making decisions, comfortable with taking on risk earlier than I might have otherwise been.
That might be a cool podcast for you to do with Eric and maybe somebody else who is a multi-generational practice too, just to see what the good stuff, bad stuff was. That could be fun.
That would be fun.
Yeah, I think that could be really cool. All right, so I think I use those 3 things to help me be more decisive, as thinking the worst case in the 3 months. So the other thing I did was, as Erin knows, is I asked some of my colleagues and friends what I should talk about. And actually what I also asked them was, I think my question was, can you think of something that I have said or taught or done that you thought was in the same vein as the theme for this leadership conference, which was Be Bold. And I got some really interesting feedback, a lot from Erin, as a matter of fact. And, it was kind of an emotional thing for me to see all this stuff. It wasn't what I expected people to tell me, actually. That and this one, some of these first ones are actually from Erin. He said that he sees me be bold when I'm decisive, even when I'm scared of something. Again, using that whole worst case scenario or 3-month scenario is helpful. To admit when I'm wrong, which I got to because I'm wrong a lot, and allow others to be wrong with grace. Again, if I'm wrong, I need the grace too, right? So that's easy to do. And sharing the spotlight elevates everyone. I kind of have this thing. I remember one time watching somebody up on stage. It was actually a TOA thing. And I was sitting next to actually Dr. Ron Hopping. Mm-hmm. And the guy up on stage started talking about some idea or some program like it was his. And I knew the story, and it was Ron's. I was so angry for him. And he's like, whatever. And I'm like, no, that's not right. So I think I have some kind of innate, always make sure you give people credit where credit's due, right? That just seems so wrong to me. So I think that's where my share the spotlight comes from, is maybe that it's, I don't know, wrong to not give credit. And then, so when I showed Eric this slide, my son, I had down, to live your core values. And he goes, Mom, if I saw that on somebody's slide, I'd go, whatever. That's just like airy-fairy stuff. And I was like, and he said, what you need to tell him what that actually means to you. And he actually said this, which is that when we're trying to make a decision, or when something's going wrong in the office, or even in our personal life, that if we have these core values that we reference, then it helps make your decision becomes so clear. And so in our office, our core values are to be friendly, efficient, truthful, compassionate, and that we have fun. And so it's so much easier to think back to what those core values are in our mission statement, which is to wow our staff, patients, and our community. But things can always go back to that, and it really helps make those decisions. So, and then I have some personal core values too. I think one of my bigger ones, which I talked about earlier, is just to try to make a difference for my family, my optometry family, and try to be helpful and help people live their best lives, I think, as much as I can, a little bit I can. Stand up for who and what you believe in. This came from another optometrist, which is kind of funny. I've gotten myself in trouble on this one before. I was told when I was moving up in the TOA structure, there was someone that was basically not going to be allowed to be on the board because there was a story about him, which I knew they didn't know the whole story and wasn't true. And, I was like fighting for him. And the president at the time came to me and said, you need to be quiet because, you're trying to, be an officer and, you're hurting yourself. And I go, I don't care. Like, if this association I can't say what I believe in this association, I don't want to be a part of it. So it didn't hurt me whatsoever, by the way. And I did get the guy did get on, and the story got told correctly. So things like that, if it's right, it's right. And what does Ted Lasso say? It's never wrong to do the right thing.
Yep.
So believe that very strongly. Have no trouble seeking help, and I don't know something. I think that comes with years of experience of going, there's no way for me to know everything. I've always had a consultant. I've always had mentors. So, just because I help other people sure doesn't mean I don't need help. And this came from another doctor, a friend of mine, colleague of mine, and she says, it amazes me how you still trust people even after some of the stuff that's happened to you, that you always go there first, that you just assume everybody's, and I think most people are trying to do the right thing the vast majority of the time, and so I think that's been positive. I'm obviously comfortable sharing my struggles and telling people about all the tough times that I've had. And then this was from Joe DeLoach. He says, in business, the patients first, damn the system, which drives him crazy sometimes since he's my compliance guy. But I'm like, I don't care if you can't do it that way. It's the right thing for the patients. So I'm going to do it anyway. Probably not always the right thing to do, like the smart thing to do, but I think it's the right thing to do. So at the end of the conference, I just said, remember to be decisive, be brave, even when you're scared, and let's be bold, like Dory Carlson, who was our first female AOA president. I have a lot of respect for her. She just got her MBA in leadership a couple of years ago, and she and I have a lot of fun conversations about this kind of stuff.
Yeah, Dory's great. I love Dory.
Yeah, and then my funny last little slide. So that's it.
I like it. So I've got a question for you for those that aren't, and I apologize, my camera somehow glitched out, so you get to stare at a black screen.
Oh, okay.
And but for those that don't feel brave, don't feel bold, is it something you're born with, or is it something you can develop? Is it a skill or a trait?
Yes. I think for someone like me, it's a trait, right? Like I definitely think I've honed it over time. As a matter of fact, I'm almost the opposite, that can be too decisive and too bold. So having someone like my son, my husband, my friends, my colleagues to help slow me down a little bit is actually a good thing. So I think the answer is to know yourself, right? So if you know you have trouble with being decisive, which a lot of people with a perfect personality, everything has to be perfect before I move forward. Having a mentor in place, knowing that about yourself, being able to look in the mirror, having a mentor in place to help, push you to the next step, I think is super important. But I think that's why I gave the worst case scenario idea and the 3-month idea. For me, those are two ways that somebody who struggles with decisions can move to that next step. And I think the more you do something, it's just like my son. If you look at his profile, which we've done several times, he is very risk averse. And this is the this is the doctor partner who came up with the idea of expanding our building, which we're planning on doing. I mean, he's doing all kinds of things that are taking risks at this point in time. And I think I think he's developed that skill on the right way to do it and put it in the right place in his brain. He's got me to help him, right? And also be, supportive. Like when he's really stressing over something, I'm like, it'll work out. And sometimes you need somebody to say, it'll work out, right? So I do think it's easier for some people, for sure.
Yeah. But it can be developed too.
Absolutely.
You can work on just, answering where you want to go to dinner. Right? That's
True.
the biggest fight my wife and I get into. I don't care where to you to go, Mexican, not Mexican. Anywhere else.
I give 3 options and I tell my husband to pick one. That's what I do.
There you go.
But I have one of my mentees that she's been a mentee of mine for a really long time. She's a very strong, perfect personality. She is very risk averse. This is what she tells me. She channels me. She thinks, what would Laurie say? And sometimes she calls me, of course, but she knows enough now to know what I'm going to tell her. And she has a big old practice, owns her building, has 3 or 4 doctors working for her now. And she's been pretty aggressive on growing and all that kind of stuff. So, Anne had to go through divorce, during this process, which really put her in it's a tough place for her to be. And she's done so well. And I really think she's getting better and better and better at it, because she's having to make more and more of those decisions and be more decisive, be bolder.
One of the things I picked up on, and you probably recognize this too, is throughout your talk, you always referenced people along the way. And not just mentors, but support. I don't want to say support group because it's not therapy, but just somebody to bounce ideas off of, somebody to a group to get input from. Even for this talk, and I've got to tell you, when you sent me the email saying, hey, give me some thoughts, you probably didn't think twice of it. I was blown away that Laurie Sorrenson would be asking me, my input on what she should talk about and herself, because I hold you in such high regard as one of my mentors. But seems like you've always had the group that you're comfortable being vulnerable with and asking help from, and I'm assuming they're the same back with you.
Yeah, you're one of my newer ones. For sure. Bethany Fishbein, she's the CEO of Power Practice now. She was my consultant with Power Practice years ago. She still is, basically. But she's somebody I really go to when I'm struggling with stuff too. She's super insightful, so she's been a big help for me. You and Mick Kling, obviously, are big ones. Joe Loach, huge, right? Especially if you want to hear the don't do this stuff. He's a really good one. And my son, honestly, just running things through him. I run stuff through him all the time, including this talk and several times with that. And my husband, too. too. He's a lot more of a let's do it type person. So I kind of need somebody on the other side, let's slow down person. And he's definitely not a let's slow down person. He's, he's a yes man. He wants to do everything. But it's kind of nice to have that in your corner too, right?
Oh yeah. I think you need hype people. You need somebody to slow you down, and you need all four of the personalities in our world just to see all the perspectives and all the different sides.
I think that's true. And even just talking to all the mentees that I have, all the young people, I just, yes, they're asking me for advice, but man, I learn from that so much too, right? Because different situations come up, and having to think through that thought process and figure out what's the right thing to do. As a matter of fact, today, was it this morning? I think it was this morning. One of them texted me and Eric, and I came back with an answer, and then he came back with an answer. It was basically, the conclusion was the same, but his reasoning process was different. And I was like, oh, that's really good. So, it will help me help somebody else even more down the road too.
No, that's super cool. And I love having, young docs reach out and even experiencing things that I'll never have a chance to experience, but through them. Chances to buy other practices or different speaking opportunities or, different equipment type stuff. It's fun to live vicariously through them, see their excitement, and because I get to feel that joy as well.
Yeah. And, a lot of them have, I think COVID did this too. There's a lot of anxiety out there too.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't know that I'm as good at helping them with that, just because I don't think I've ever had too much of that. But I learned a lot from it because it's pervasive in my practice and in these younger docs, and that's a tougher thing to work with for sure and help out.
Yeah, definitely. But I think you're really good at helping just grounding. You don't have to live up to all the expectations that are put on us from the outside. Live up to your expectations of yourself, but not necessarily what everybody else thinks that you should be doing. And that's how you started this. All the goals that you never had that everybody thought you had. Everybody put on you.
And I didn't. Things just kept happening. Somebody would, I would get passionate about talking about one thing. I remember, how I got involved with AOA was I got a phone call trying to raise money for, I think it was the AOA PAC. And it was somebody who didn't know what they were talking about, and I found it really annoying. So I I guess I wrote a letter because we didn't have email back then. I don't know what I did. But I wrote and said, this was a terrible way to do this. I did not like it at all. Guess who called me? The president of the AOA. And then he puts me on a committee. So then I started getting involved in that kind of stuff. And then I got involved with TOA. And, one of my teachers back then put me on a committee for TOA. And so it just kept happening. And also I think, I feel like a lot of times I've been put in situations where, just like when I got embezzled from, I was put in a situation, I'm supposed to be the Benedict professor of practice management, and I felt, that I was an imposter, like imposter syndrome, right? And so imposter syndrome for me personally is probably my biggest motivator. So when I became legislative chair, I was like, I was following Jody Loach, by the way, so I was like, crap, nobody even knows who I am. We still use it to this day. I created a spreadsheet with all the legislators, who their key contacts were, with comments, all the different kind of stuff that you need to know. And I did it for me because I wanted to know them all. I wanted to know more about all the legislators in the country, in the state, than anybody else did, so that I didn't feel like such an imposter. I kind of did the same thing when I was on the AOA committee. It was the statutory scope, which is about all the state scope laws. Mm-hmm. I memorized everybody's scope laws. I knew all 50 states' scopes.
Wow.
I knew them on the back of my hand because here I was on this committee. Nobody knew I knew what they were thinking. They were thinking, Call put me on this committee because he likes me, and she's not very smart or something. So I had to make sure that I really knew. I knew more than the rest of the committee did on what the state laws were. But that was totally because I felt like an imposter, but that helps a lot.
You took that as motivator.
Yeah, and I think I do that in a lot of ways, and it helps get me to be better.
Nice. Well, Laurie, this was fun. You and I could talk forever, but for the sake
I
of
know.
everybody listening, we'll have to set this up again. But I appreciate you sharing your talk with us, your speech with us. That was great. And like I said, I think I could not think of a better person to talk about being bold.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate that.
I appreciate all you do. So cool. Well, go have fun the rest of your day. I'm sure you've got a thing or two lined up.
That's you.
Awesome. We'll talk later.
Okay. Bye, Aaron.